There's that popular statistic that money is a big reason why people get divorced. But the flip side is also true that if you're managing money effectively together as a team, that can actually strengthen your marriage and lower the chances of divorce.
Prenups. These are controversial. We're not talking about this because why would we set ourselves up to fail before we even start?
To me, the goal with managing your money in marriage or with another person is really to make progress as a team and also to make sure both of you are legally protected. And something that I think changed my perspective on this subject irrevocably was a quote from a divorce attorney named James Sexton. He says, "Marriage is the most legally significant thing you will do in your life other than die, and you don't get so much as a leaflet about how your rights and how your finances will never be the same. It's a contract that is binding until death, and there's nothing to read before you sign it."
Katie, it is so cool to have you here on the Learning Leader Show. Welcome.
Thank you. It's so good to be here.
I loved reading the dedication in your book because it's kind of spicy, and I think that's a cool way to start. And you said to the anonymous guy who works in finance, quote in quotes, that used to relentlessly comment on my nascent website in 2018, urging me to quit writing about money and to, quote, keep it to myself. I hope you're well. Can you tell me more about your motivation from this guy to kind of like, it felt like a little bit of a chip, a little spicy. Tell me
For
more about
sure.
this and some of the motivation to do the stuff that you've done.
Yeah, isn't that nice? What a good first impression I'm gonna make on your community. They're like, wow, she can really hold a grudge. Yeah, this is somebody and an experience that always stuck with me because I think when you start to put yourself out there, if you are building a business or you're trying to, I don't know, make a mark on the world with your work, it is going to involve facing criticism and facing feedback. And not all that feedback is going to be positive. And that's something that I've dealt with a lot over the years. But that was really the first time very early on when I was publishing a blog for, I don't know, probably like 16 people who read it, my mom, my neighbor, the people I went to college with. And I had gotten really interested in personal finance kind of overnight. And so this blog that I had been writing that was formerly about dating and my career and whatever, I kind of transitioned it really abruptly into a blog about money. And this was like this person that I dedicated the book to, who I don't know who it was. It was just some anonymous person. I kind of consider them like my first troll or my first hater. And it was this moment where every time I would publish something new, like without fail, this person would comment and would leave me these long screeds basically saying like, you shouldn't be writing about this. I'm a financial professional and you don't have the qualifications to have opinions about money online. You should really stop writing about this. And as I was turning in the book and I had to write the dedication, I was like, I'm pretty sure I'm the only one of the two of us that's written a book about money. So I'm going to dedicate it to them.
It's so good. You also write about though specifically your mom in the acknowledgement section, for all the quiet days
Mm.
spent sitting on the floor of the
Mhm.
Lentz Branch Library and wandering the stacks at Barnes and Noble.
Yeah.
What impact, your dad's in there too, right? About being your number one fan and kind of always having your back at the kitchen table. Can you talk to me about your upbringing with your mom and your dad and how they set you up, or what impact they've had on you as you've gone on to build such an amazing business?
Oh, that's a really good question. And I'm impressed you read the acknowledgments. My parents were extremely supportive of me when I was a kid. They were also people who had very high expectations for the things that I was doing. So if it was school, it was straight A's or bust. Um, they didn't really have high expectations for me in sports because I'm very uncoordinated. So they let that one go pretty early on. But they were always supportive of my interests and they always really doubled down on doing your best and working your hardest. And I think in a lot of ways, I'm an only child, so they really funneled all their ambition into me.
Mhm.
But I think in a lot of ways that has been the biggest blessing and the biggest curse for me is that I am an incredibly driven person because of the people who raised me and the way I was raised, but I also have a really hard time with turning it off. I can
Mm.
become very narrow-minded and obsessive about the things that I'm doing. And I think that if you are an entrepreneur in particular, that can be a really useful trait. You can kind of weaponize that because I mean, if you're willing to put in really long hours, really focused hours, 7 days a week, like you're gonna get results. But I have found that over the years, as things have progressed, that is also a quality that I have to really be mindful of because if I don't watch it, work will completely consume me. And I think that my parents now, something that's a little bit ironic is that back in the day when I was in school and, taking all the AP classes and just was like that kind of kid, very type A, very ambitious. Back in the day, I would spend a lot of time doing homework and there was a lot of focus on my grades. And I think now, as an adult, they're often the ones that are like, remember, there's more to life than like money and success. Okay. Remember that like you can slow down a little bit. So I think sometimes they will feel like, oh gosh, what have we done? Because she really like took it and ran with it. But yes, I was very fortunate to have parents who both supported that drive early on, really cultivated it, but also taught me a lot about money and made money something in our household that was just another topic of conversation. I knew how much money my parents made, which I think is kind of unusual. Like I've told people that over the years and they're like, "Really?" I remember asking them when I was relatively young, like, "Well, how much money do you make?" And, they told me. So I never really thought of it as something that was taboo, but my mom was a very diligent manager of our household finances too. Every single time we would do anything and come home with a receipt, it would get put on her desk and she would sit there at her computer with her spreadsheet. And she probably has 20 years of spending data in this one spreadsheet. And she would, enter the amount and the category. And from a very I would say relatively young age, there was an emphasis on like, oh, you always pay your credit card bill off in full every month, though it's really important to save. And at the time you're a kid, you have no concept of monies, right? Yeah, yeah, whatever, okay. But I do think that a lot of that, even just the ability to talk about money openly in my home, made it a lot easier for me now as an adult. And especially as a young adult, when I was just getting started and kind of trying to figure out, okay, what is my financial strategy going to be? I didn't have a lot of the hangups that I think some people have who are not as fortunate or whose parents maybe didn't have as like transparent and frank of a relationship with money as mine did.
Such a gift, I think, for
Mhm.
parents to be that open and transparent because now I mean, now you've built your kind of business and life around it. I want to go
Totally.
back though, Katie, because I feel this. I sense you have this extremely high standards, dedication to excellence. And this is something that I personally deal with. So this is a selfish question, but like the problem is when you can't turn that off, the people that sometimes are collateral damage are the people you
Mm,
love the most. Meaning I have these unrelenting standards that are not really attainable for myself. But the problem is you then kind of put those on the people around you, like your spouse, your kids, and that can be a problem. I know
mhm,
from firsthand experience. I am literally dealing with this as we speak. It never goes
mhm.
away. And I'm
Yeah.
curious, how do you manage that, like with your husband or other people that you're really close to, that you have such high standards and a demand for excellence of yourself and a crazy work ethic? I know that's part of who you are, but that again, that could come out in a bad way with the people you love. How do you manage that?
Oh man, that's such a good question. I think for me, I try and sometimes succeed, sometimes fail to keep it in perspective as far as like what I'm asking that work ethic to do. So if I'm talking specifically about myself, um, and that standard of excellence that you've referred to, I think that that's interesting because it is actually something that we kind of say internally in Team Money with Katie is like okay, there's a standard of excellence for this work. Is this hitting that standard? Is it reaching that standard or not? Are we proud of this? So we actually use that phrase, which is kind of wild that you picked up on that. But I've been working with a coach over the last, I'd say 16 to 18 months. And something that we unearthed probably about a year in together is that part of the stress and the drive and the ambition, I guess you could call it, around the work is in many ways coming from this pressure that I'm putting on everything that we're doing to essentially reflect back to me this affirmation of, you're smart. Yeah, you're working really hard. Yeah, you're good at this. Like asking the work itself to be an affirmation of these things that I hope are true about me. So I guess you could call it maybe a vector of imposter syndrome,
Hmm.
but I really think it's more so about when you're putting that level of pressure on everything that you're putting out into the world to be the best thing that you've ever done, it has a way of really sucking the fun out of it. And so I think when it comes to managing that impulse and applying that impulse to other people who are not asking for it, I have found one-on-one coaching to be really, really important and really helpful. I think that a lot of the challenge with managing that impulse comes from the fact that it is just the water you're swimming in every day. So I didn't really even realize that I was doing it. And so you might be experiencing the same argument over and over again, or you might have like this pattern that you feel like you're stuck in. But until I started working with a coach and started talking to somebody about these feelings and these tendencies, I didn't really have that 360 view to be like, oh, that's where that's coming from. That's why I'm doing that. That's how that feels in my body when that like impulse creeps up. So that is something that I'm really thankful for, just that outside help, that outside perspective. And I think that if you are somebody who works really hard or works for yourself or manages a team, it is really important to have that kind of third party objective voice that you really trust, who you can tease some of this stuff out with. I mean, it's been invaluable for me.
Hmm. How is this like a business coach, a therapist, all of the above? Like what is the person? How did you come about making the decision to work with a coach? I'm curious.
Hmm.
I need this, by the way, big time. Uh like
Well,
I also think high performers want and need coaching, but it's hard to find the good ones. I don't know
yeah,
the right, you know what I'm saying? So
yes,
I'm curious
yeah.
about like how did you come up with this idea? What is the person's
Hmm.
technical job? All the
Hmm.
details behind it.
I think that the part of the reason it's really hard, well, twofold. One, there's a lot of grift in this space, and it's
Yes.
hard to know qualifications ahead of time, and it's hard to gauge effectiveness ahead of time. So that can be a hurdle. It is a hurdle, but it's also expensive. And I think that for me, as someone who tends toward saving money and investing money and writing books about how to do those things better and more, efficiently and how to optimize that,
Yeah.
I was really reticent to hiring somebody because I was like, oh, what is someone going to tell me that I don't already know? I had tried therapy in the past and it was fine, but like it didn't really give me, for me personally, it didn't end up being some like life-altering experience. So it was really a series of conversations that I had with a friend. Her name's Tara, who runs a multi-million dollar ed tech company. And she was a person that, as you get, those people that you meet where like they're just so themselves, they're so
Yes.
embodied, they're so confident, they're so authentic to themselves and kind of certain about what they want and not afraid to try things. That's how Tara is. And she and I had this conversation about coaching, and she asked me if I had ever worked with coaches or been in mastermind programs or done anything of that nature. And I kind of was like, no, I think all that's bullshit. Like, I think all that is grift. Like, this is coaches coaching coaches. It's a pyramid scheme. And she was kind of like, huh, that's interesting. Like, I've invested a lot of money in this work, and I could point you to that's the person that helped me 10x my business. That's the person that helped me finally break free of this like, limiting belief that was really holding me back. And I was very skeptical. I think I'm kind of a cynical person by nature, and I'm a cynical optimist, we'll say, but I tend to try to think more at the systems level than at the individual level. And so I kind of wrote off a lot of it. But after a while, I was like, but I can't deny the fact that she's getting results that I'm not getting. And she seems tapped into something that I'm not tapped into. So, like, what could it hurt? So I had posted on Instagram toward the end of 2023, hey, I'm looking to hire. I'm trying to level up next year. I really want to take things to the next level. I feel like I've, had some success in business and things have been going well, but I feel like I'm kind of at a crossroads. And in order to really kick things up a notch, I gotta figure this out. I need somebody who can help me get there. So I was originally looking for a business coach because I'm thinking I need tactics. I'm thinking I need strategies. And then I get this email from a girl that I went to high school with who was like, hey, I think that you would really, really like this coach that I've been working with. Her name's Elizabeth. And I was like, well, what kind of coach is she? Does she do business coaching? Does she know how to scale? How is she familiar with media? Like, I'm asking these types of questions. She's like, no, no, no. She's a life coach. And I'm like, whatever. Life coach. Okay, sure. So I end up taking a first like referral with her though, because this woman I went to high school with gifted me a session with her. And so I prep my Google Doc ahead of time. I'm like, okay, these are the three directions that I see my business going in. These are the three different paths. I see these options. I think we could scale this way. We could do this. We could do this. I send her this Google Doc ahead of time. And we sit down for this first session together. And she's like, okay, fuck your Google Doc. She's like, you are way too in your head. You are way too concerned with like the minutia. You don't even know where you want to go yet. Do you even know what you want to do? And I was like, no, you're right. I actually haven't spent any time thinking about what I actually want. And so the first hour that we spent together, I think we did like a meditation. I mean, it was completely different than what I was expecting, but I left that session with what felt like a huge leap forward in clarity. And I was like, yeah, I got to work with this person. There's something here. Like she's doing some stuff that I am not tapped into. And we ended up, I basically asked her, she presented me with these two options. You can do the year, or you can do monthly, and both are expensive. So I'm like, oh gosh, I don't know. So I was like, sit with it for a while. And we basically worked something out where I said, I really want to do this, but I need an off ramp if this is snake oil, basically. Like I feel really good about that first session, but if what if that's all you got? Basically, the
Mm-hmm.
skepticism continued, and she was like, "Sure, sure. If at 3 months you don't think it's working, you can break the contract and we'll be done." But by the 3 month mark, I was like completely sold. And yeah, it's one of the best investments in myself and in my business that I've ever made. Because even though she's not there to talk to me about these different strategies and tactics, she helps me work on myself. And I think what I've learned is that as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, as somebody who has had that experience of kind of creating something out of nothing and like shepherding something new into the world, I think a lot of the answers are in here.
Mm-hmm.
And I had just gotten way too in my head and kind of forgot that, I have the resources. And if there are other resources I need to go need, like I will, that the first step is being able to recognize where your gaps are. And so it's been a really good experience, but yeah, it was just not what I was expecting.
I think life coach is just a terrible name, though.
Hmm.
They should be like a performance coach or something. Like when I hear that phrase, Katie, I'm like, nope, not happening.
Yeah, I
Like
know.
they should just rebrand it or something if that's what you call it. Because like there's as you said, there's just so much grift in that arena. But
Yeah,
that's interesting. I may want to talk with you more about that later. I don't want to get off
sure.
track for the rest of this though. But you mentioned being an entrepreneur in your business. I vividly remember when the news came out that you were being or your business was being acquired by
Both.
by Morning Brew. Um,
Yeah.
as someone, who has a media business and the different elements that go with that, it was super interesting to me that Morning Brew was a media company that had built itself up and scaled, got acquired themselves, and now was acquiring you. I was like, whoa, I need to learn more about this. So
Hmm.
can you talk to me about what was going on up to that moment, and then what made you decide to agree to the acquisition with the Morning Brew team?
Totally. So I write about this story in a little more detail in the book in chapter 2 as part of this. Basically, there are multiple ways to earn more money, right? You can either
Mhm.
earn more money working for someone else, or you can go the entrepreneurship route. And so, having done both now in my career, I wanted to kind of write a hybrid chapter that dives into all the finer points of kind of both paths. So that's what I did. But this particular experience was really, really, I learned a lot from it because I had been running Money with Katie. I'd started it in April 2020. And then I had been running it on my own as a solopreneur from April 2020 until around November 2021. So call it about 18 months. And things were going really, really well for me. I had kind of stumbled into a solid monetization strategy. And I had also just gotten a job working in user experience design for Meta, formerly Facebook. So I had this great, cushy tech job with good benefits on one hand. Then I also had this kind of nascent personal finance media company that was growing month over month at a really solid clip. And I was seeing a lot of success with it. So I was really kind of content, but also looking ahead to go, okay, my side project, my side hustle is earning twice as much as my full-time job
Through ads, right? Or
through
what
ads, through digital product sales, through affiliate revenue. So I had several, it was a well diversified.
that you figured out all yourself.
Yeah, I mean, it was, and that's kind of the thing is like, even for the ads, people are like, how did you sell your first ads? I mean, I literally DM'd the businesses that I wanted to work with and be like, hey, I'm Kate. I mean, I don't know where the confidence came from. I honestly think it was like when you can kind of have, it's naivete that ends up working in
Absolutely.
your favor, where like you don't know any better, or you don't know that that's weird. So you're just like, whatever, I'll just DM them and be like, my blog's great. You should definitely sponsor it. And like to my shock and awe, people were like, okay. So that was how that all kind of came together. And it was like the product similarly just responding to this is what readers are asking for, and I think it'd be fun to make something like that. So why not? So it was a very it was a very easy breezy kind of like love at first sight business in that sense, where the first 18 months it was really fun to build it. And so I was looking ahead though to 2022 and going, all right, I really want to go full time with this, but I'm nervous because it feels like I have this other career that has just kind of taken its next step. I just moved from a good company where I was paid decently to like one of the tech companies where you can make a lot. And I was like, oh, this is like a prestigious job. If I really want to be a UX writer in my career, I don't want to throw that away. But my heart was elsewhere. So I'm like really weighing this decision to try to take it full time and penciling out all the numbers of, well, what would that look like and what would be the worst case scenario. And that was around the time that I think a DM on Twitter from Austin Reef, who was the CEO of Morning Brew at the time and one of the co-founders. And he was like, hey, I think what you're doing with Money with Katie's interesting. I'd love to talk. So at the time, I figured, oh, they're probably trying to spin up a personal finance for women thing. Like he just wants to ask me if I have any learnings to share, basically. We talked for 30 minutes. And at the end, he's like, all right, I'm going to cut to the chase. Like, we want to buy Money with Katie. And I was kind of taken aback. I was like, what? No, like that's crazy. Like, why would you want to do that? Because I basically told him there's no way that this would be mutually beneficial. Like either you're going to pay me the amount that I want to make from this and you're not going to make any money, or you're going to make all the money and I'm going to be working for my own brand for like a pittance and that's stupid. So I kind of sat with it for a little while and originally was like really leaning toward no because I was having so much fun with it that I was like, I don't want to sell this to somebody else. But as we kept talking and I write about this kind of thought process in the book of like, okay, well, what is most important? Like, let's prioritize here. Most important is I want to be able to stop context switching. Right now, I spend all day doing one thing and then nights and weekends do another. That's not like a super sustainable lifestyle in the long term. So I know I want to do this full time anyway. I want to make more money than I'm making now doing both of these things, but to do just one. And I want to learn because this is a media company that has $50 million dollars a year in revenue. This is a media company that knows how to sell ads, right? I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm flying by the seat of my pants. So as we continued the negotiation over the course of like the next 6 weeks, and I really started to think about the long-term play, the best advice that I got was from a friend of mine who also actually had recently sold a company to, I think, Acorns. He was like, well, would you rather have 100% of a grape or 25% of a watermelon? Because that was kind of how we were framing the like, I'll get to keep a percentage, but not the whole thing. And I was like, oh, yeah, good point. So I ended up doing it. And in January 2022, Money with Katie became part of Morning Brew. So now it's been part of Morning Brew longer than it was independent. They do own all of it, they own 100% of it. And I get a revenue share and I have a base salary as well. But the big lesson that I took away from that negotiation and that I really wanted to make sure I conveyed in the book for any entrepreneurs who end up in a similar position is your intellectual property is the most valuable thing that you are negotiating over. And it is probably going to be worth it to cede other terms in order to keep some of the work that you're doing to retain some level of ownership over the thing that you're creating. And there are a lot of other terms that I think are worth negotiating as well that I outline in chapter 2. But when my original 3-year contract ended this past January and we were renegotiating a new one, that was something that I kind of came back to the table with and said, I have to have a termination clause in this contract that gives me a path to buying this back from you. I don't want to be in a situation ever again where if I leave or if something ends, that I lose everything that I've built. So that's something that I would have negotiated differently the first time around, but was fortunate enough this time around to have that opportunity to come back to the table and say, I'm willing to give up some other things in this contract. I will cede other terms to you if you include a term that says what happens if we part ways and gives me a path back to independent ownership. Because the primary value of the thing that I'm spending 60 hours a week working on needs to be accruing to me. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. Like, I think you reach a point there, at least I feel like I did, where why am I going to continue building something for somebody else where if it were to end someday, like I have nothing. I have the money, but I don't have the work. Like it would make more sense for me to go start something else. And I think that they, to their credit, came to the table in good faith and saw that and agreed with me that that was a fair ask. And your negotiation partner will not always come to the table in good faith, but that is a really, really big learning that I think we've seen play out over and over again, particularly in this space, that the IP is everything. Like Alex Cooper leaving Barstool and Dave Portnoy structuring their contract and her negotiating to get the Call Her Daddy IP back. She has made how many tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars off that IP now? And that was probably the smartest thing that she ever did. But it's just if you don't know any better when you are faced with that decision, like I didn't, completely naive, completely unequipped to negotiate with somebody that had themselves just been acquired, and had a lot more experience with those sort of deals. You just don't know any better. And so it was really important to me to put that sort of information in this book that I hadn't read about in other personal finance books.
Well, that relates to another part of the book, prenups. Like these are controversial. Like these are like, hey, we're not talking about this because why would we set ourselves up to fail before we even start? That type, we've all heard that. Like I probably
Hmm.
said that before, like, but let's relate that though now more of a personal life and the financial elements of prenups and postnups, which you write about both of those things. Um, and yeah, this is
Yeah,
just a really touchy subject. It's almost hard to even know
totally.
how to ask this question. But what are your thoughts on prenups?
So, to me, the goal with managing your money in marriage or with another person is really to make progress as a team and also to make sure both of you are legally protected. And something that I think changed my perspective on this subject irrevocably was a quote from a divorce attorney named James Sexton. He says, marriage is the most legally significant thing you will do in your life other than die, and you don't get so much as a leaflet about how your rights have just changed and how your finances will never be the same. It's a contract that is binding until death, and there's nothing to read before you sign it. So, for starters, I like to just set the stage by saying the rule of thumb to remember is that anything that either of you earn, buy, or borrow after the date of marriage is probably going to be treated as marital joint property that belongs to both of you if you ever get divorced. Now, that is probably going to be the case even if you have a prenup. Prenups that, let me put that differently, like prenups are not like a magic tool that means everything is going to be kept separate. They typically just specify, okay, any separate property that either of you came into the marriage with, we'd like to keep that separate so that if we do split up someday, that stuff isn't on the table for the taking. And it also can be used for a very critical thing that I think is really, really important for women specifically, because women are more likely to leave paid work to take care of children. And that is specifying spousal support. So this applies to any person who enters a marriage who thinks that at some point they may want to be a stay-at-home parent. This is a choice that I think everyone should be freely able to make without fear of the financial consequences someday. So there's a story that I tell in the book, the whole fourth chapter. It's called I Thee Wed and Spend Thy Bread. It's all about managing money together in marriage, how to set yourselves up as a team, how to find success, how to build wealth together, how to attack debt as a team, right? But it's also, and here's how to legally protect yourselves and be realistic. I tell this story in the book about this woman named Terry Martin Hecker, who wrote an op-ed in the New York Times in the 1970s. And it was basically this kind of alternately playful, indignant piece where she was talking about, hey, the women's rights movement, you guys say you want women to do their own thing, but I'm a housewife, and it doesn't seem like you all are supportive of that. And at the end, she's kind of talking about how this can be a really fulfilling path. And, I'm really happy to kind of play second fiddle to my husband. And she ends up going on this book tour. She gets a book deal. She kind of travels the world, espousing the virtues of, being the stay-at-home wife. And then in 2006, she writes a follow-up op-ed. And the follow-up op-ed is called Paradise Lost Domestic Division. And she talks about how on her 40th wedding anniversary, after she had stayed home over the years, devoted her life to her family, raised her 5 children, that her husband asked her for a divorce because he had met a younger woman. And over the course of the divorce proceedings, she's now in her 60s, the judge basically tells her, well, you need to find a job. Keep in mind, this woman has not worked in 40 years. So employment prospects are not good. She ends up eligible for SNAP benefits. And she writes a book in 2009 called Disregard First Book. And she basically comes to this conclusion of like, this is a cautionary tale that if you are going to do what I did, you need to protect yourself. Now, again, in modern times in 2025, you know, this is advice that is just as applicable in some ways to men who might want to be stay-at-home fathers. But the bottom line is that if you spend decades out of the workforce, you're accumulating zeros in the Social Security records, you don't have an opportunity to invest for your own retirement. You need to ensure that if your partnership ends someday, and God forbid, that you will have a certain amount of income for a certain amount of time to get yourself back on your feet. I interviewed several divorce lawyers for this book. All of them told me that judges are not often kind about spousal support in the absence of a prenup. So to me, that is kind of the main reason that I think people should get them, because they allow you, when you are feeling the most optimistic and the most rosy about your future together, to say, hey, I love you so much that this is what I want to guarantee that you have in life, even if someday it's not with me. I think that that is so much more romantic and selfless than being like, well, what happens, happens, babe. Let's lock the door, throw away the key, and like hope for the best. Because the reality is that everybody has a prenup. Every couple has a prenup. The difference is whether you're writing it yourself or the state is writing it for you. And I think if given the choice, if you have the opportunity, you're probably better off writing it yourself.
What was it like for you?
So my husband is an attorney, and we had talked I think we were engaged for about 6 months before we got legally married, because he went into the Air Force, and ever the rational optimizer, we were like, well, your salary will be higher if you have a dependent. So let me sign on the dotted line and let me become the dependent. We had talked about getting a prenup, and it was a pretty like low drama conversation. I think we both saw the value in it, particularly because we had both been saving and investing for several years at that point, and we had accumulated separately like kind of comparable amounts of not insignificant money. And the embarrassing truth is that we basically just never got around to it. We were 26 and 27 at the time. Now we're 30, 31. And in retrospect, we kind of joke all the time about how, like, the benign neglect of paperwork was the reason we didn't do it. Like we had the hard conversation, the supposedly hard conversation. We were on the same page about it. We just kind of it slipped through the cracks. So we actually don't have a prenup. And I write that in the book. Like, you read this very long section where I outline all the benefits and I talk about all the considerations and all the terms you should be thinking about. And then I'm like, yeah, so you're probably like, wow, I've never met a woman so excited about contract law. I bet her prenup is ironclad. And then I'm like, but womp womp. Like, this is a mistake that I made that I don't want you to make. But in the absence of a prenup, I think you can get a postnup. That's a really solid second option. You can do a postnup, though they tend to have more issues with enforceability. So like all things held equal, get the prenup if you can, if you have that opportunity before you get married. Um, but that's where managing money as a team becomes incredibly important. So I talk about the three different ways that people tend to. I'm going to get a drink of water, actually, 1 second. So, in the book, I talk about the three different ways that you can manage money as a couple. You can either kind of do the traditional model, which is you're going to combine everything, or you can do the what I call the roommate model, which is everything stays separate, or you can do the yours, mine, and ours, which is what I personally do and what I recommend to people because I think it strikes the best balance between morale boosting and recognizing that you are a team with joint goals and you're planning this future together, but it also allows you to have a little more autonomy and frankly a little bit more safety should something go wrong someday. Now, The interesting thing that I always want to point out to people who kind of go the everything separate route is that if you have decided as a couple that keeping everything separate is strategically beneficial to you and you've had the conversations and that is the decision that you have come to, that's perfectly fine. However, if you are using separate finances as a band-aid for not having those conversations or for avoiding the process of getting on the same page, that can be a harbinger of trouble down the road. And where the legal stuff comes in and why I think this chapter is so critical for people and should be in every single personal finance book where you teach people how marriage changes their finances is that that separation is an illusion. If you were to split up someday, all of that money that came into that marriage after the date of marriage belongs to both of you. And maybe a little bit scarier, any debt that that person took on also belongs to both of you. This is particularly serious in community property states, of which I believe there are 9 or 10, Texas and California among them. So some of the most populous states in the country have this rule where if you get divorced in one of these states, everything is just straight down the middle, 50-50. So there are legal ways, around that if you get into a situation where you are finding yourself divorcing from somebody who has taken out a lot of debt. But it's a legal headache. Lawyers charge a lot of money. It is much better if you can get on the same page about money while you're married and avoid that entirely. There was a financial therapist that I interviewed for the book and for the show who kind of pointed out that there's that popular statistic that money is a big reason why people get divorced. But the flip side is also true that if you're managing money effectively together as a team, that can actually strengthen your marriage and lower the chances of divorce. So I think it's really important to remember that money can actually be something that brings you closer together, that is something that's within reach for you. And I think understanding how legally your relationship to one another's assets and liabilities will change once you lock yourselves together. I think that's like a really important first step. But yeah, there's a lot in this
Yeah,
chapter
I,
about
I,
keeping
I think that
the
those
page.
can be really enjoyable conversations. Um, Meaning, for example, you could say something like, what's the purpose, what's the point of striving so hard to make so much money? And this is a conversation we had in our home, and it's
Mm-hmm.
to create memorable, amazing experiences with our family. And so that usually
Mm-hmm.
looks like traveling, concerts, hiking, skiing, like any sort of quality time, dinners, quality time as a unit, as a family.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes when you're working long, you're working extra, you're traveling, like we're generating fun coupons and experiences for our family, and that, I think that brings you together. Like that can bring you
Mm-hmm.
together by having, like, what are we doing this for? Like, why are we
Mm-hmm.
working so hard, or why are we striving extra? It's not just for the money, but it's what we're
Mm-hmm.
turning the money into, right? And
Yeah.
so, and you also sense, like, what do you value? Do you care about homes or jewelry or cars, or do you care about trying to turn that hard work into great experiences
Mm-hmm.
as a family union? I think that can be good. That kind of leads me, Katie, to my next question, which is this phrase that you write about called being financially free. I think we could have an understanding of what that
Mm.
means, but how does somebody know what their number is, or how do they know what they need to get to be, quote, financially free?
Yeah. So it's a really good question. And I think that it is the backbone of all financial planning. So my start in the personal finance world was in the financial independence, retire early community, like that
Fire, yeah.
wing of personal finance. And so anyone familiar with that movement knows that they basically turn personal finance into an extreme sport. And
Mm-hmm.
so because that was sort of my baptism into the financial world, I still rely pretty heavily on what I think are some of their most quantitatively sound principles. And one of those principles is that retirement is not an age, retirement is a number, and it is a number that you can calculate. So I devoted all of chapter 3 to this subject. It's called Knowledge is Power because I think that this was the knowledge that really transformed my relationship with instant gratification. And basically, my spendthrift qualities were completely neutered by understanding something called the 4% rule. So, the 4% rule, for those who are unfamiliar, was discovered in 1994 by a no joke, MIT educated rocket scientist who became a CFP and was really curious. How much will my clients need to retire? Now, at the time, nobody could answer that question. No one really knew. So you had pundits who would throw out outrageous numbers like $10 million, but there was no way to personalize that data for a client based on how much money they had, how much they were spending, etc. So what Bengen did was he sat down with, I believe, 70 something years of real stock market data and real inflation data, and he compared dozens of overlapping 30-year periods of real historical hypothetical retirements and said, what is the amount that every retiree could have withdrawn from their investment portfolio and never run out of money, or at the very least, have made it all the way through that 30-year retirement without running out of money. And the number that he found was 4%. So if we know this, all we have to do is essentially take the inverse of that number, multiply our annual spending by the inverse of 4%, so 25. So once you have accumulated 25 times your annual spending in a particular asset allocation, something between 50 and 75% US equities, and then 25 and 50% US government bonds, that you should theoretically be able to use 4% of that amount every year, withdraw it and live on it. And theoretically, you should be just fine for many decades at least. I believe it's something like in 75% of scenarios, people die with more than they even retired with, which is crazy and just goes to show the power of compounding. But I just find this a really useful shorthand for, okay, let me contextualize how close or far away I am. It also makes your spending decisions now easier to contextualize and easier to make honest trade-offs with. You might decide that the bigger house is worth it for you and your family, even if it means that that number, that magic number of work optionality is going to get a little bit farther away. Or you might go, oh, you know what? I actually like don't want to buy the Mercedes anymore because if I do, my number is going to get 3 years away. This is the magic of being able to translate money to time that these principles allow. And it has been integral in my financial coming of age. And I think that the other really cool thing about it is that even if you're not all the way financially free, even if you are not in a position where you would never have to work for income again, just structuring your life in such a way that you are pursuing that goal is going to give you infinitely more optionality. After a certain point, a friend said this to me the other day. She was like, life becomes a video game because you're not having to make decisions based on money anymore, which is an incredibly privileged place to be in for sure. But it's also a place that is in some ways up to you and in your locus of control if you can live beneath your means to the point that that becomes possible. But there are, as we all know, plenty of people who make 200, 250, $300,000 a year who are effectively paycheck to paycheck because their lifestyle has just scaled up with their income. And I find that golden handcuffs situation to be the most terrifying path that one could possibly be on because you are not going to get paid $300,000 a year or anywhere close to it to like sit back and twiddle your thumbs in most cases. That's usually going to take quite a bit of work. And so I think that a lot of really ambitious, driven, high achieving, high performing people find themselves trapped in that cycle and then have very little maneuverability to get out of it.
Yeah. I personally, and I know you write about this too, love the set it and forget it mentality. I have conversations with
Hmm.
my financial advisor quite a bit. but I really just want to automate as much as humanly possible. All 529s for me are automated. All of our investing is automated. Everything
Nice.
is pulled no matter what every month, and we just sit down every 6 months or so and try to increase that amount of money.
Beautiful.
And that way, it doesn't matter what's happening in the markets. It doesn't matter what's going on. We are always buying. We are never pulling out of it. It's just done. And then hire somebody who's far wiser than me about it to pay attention closely to that, do that for a living. I feel like that's now much like your parents, though. I was very lucky that my parents set that up for me when I was 22, when I was
Mm,
graduating college, right? I got a college scholarship and they gave me some of the money that they had saved for me for college with a financial advisor. I went and met with a financial advisor. He helped me like get my first house, all of that stuff. So there's a huge element of privilege and luck in that statement as well, because I didn't have to like learn the hard way. I learned because I had amazing parents. So I think us now as leaders and those who are of us who are parents, that's part of our job. I think that's one of our responsibilities, is to be financially literate ourselves. That's why
mm,
your work is
mhm.
so important, guys, girls, everybody, right? I know you kind of have a rich girl nation, and it's kind of slanted a little bit towards women, but I'll tell you, I'm not a rich girl, but it definitely applies to me. All the stuff you're talking about, it's helpful. So I think that's why I would highly recommend your work. I do have
Oh,
one more
thank
question before
you.
we run, though. Let's say you're meeting with somebody who is like a little bit earlier version of you, but maybe they're not as sure of what they want to do. They're 22ish to
Mm.
25. They're recent college grad, highly educated, want to make a dent in the world, as you talked about at the beginning of our conversation, but not like fully sure what they want to do. What are some general pieces of life/career advice you give to that person?
The most valuable thing that I have learned over the last 7, 8 years of my career is if you're not curious about it, you are not going to give it your all. If
Mm,
you don't want it, it's going to be an uphill battle. So I don't say that because I think people should put a lot of pressure on the thing that they're working on to be the most important thing in their life or to be their passion project, like that whole thing. I think that that can become a slippery slope, and I'm very, very aware that the barriers and the obstacles that a lot of people face are in a lot of ways, frankly, like there are large swaths of this country that face insurmountable uh, barriers. I'm thinking particularly of like people in low wage jobs that are really just hustling to keep the lights on. But if you are in a position of privilege such that you have that latitude in your career to really pursue what you're interested in, my what I would consider to be secret weapon over the last several years has been that I am genuinely interested and genuinely curious about the work that I am doing. And there is such a difference in outcomes. If I am really into something that I'm working on, it's going to be second to none. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be top tier. But if I'm not, it's like I might as well just not even do it. It's just going to be a waste of time because it's not going to be good. It's not going to be a needle mover in the same way. And so I think that like we really underweight the power of desire in our work and how far that desire will go. Um, it will make you relentless if you desire something enough. And so rather than working against it or rather than trying to force it, I think it's much easier to find the thing that you actually desire, where you are going to really put the necessary time and reps and effort in. Because like everything takes time, reps, and effort. That's not a question. Like that's just going to be the reality if you want to have a really meaningful working life, which I think most people, if they're being honest, do. I think most of us want to spend our time every day doing something we really care about. But that if you can pair drive with desire, I think you will be unstoppable.
you will be relentless. So good. The book is called Rich Girl Nation: Taking Charge of Our Financial Futures. Thank you for sending me a copy. It's really good, really well written, much like, not surprising that your writing would be both fun to read, great stories, but also a lot of practical application
Thank
tools,
you.
ways for you to actually like make a difference and impact, change your life for the better. So
Mm,
really well done. Thank you for being here. I would love, Katie, to continue our dialogue as we both
for
progress.
sure. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was really fun. You asked really interesting questions too. So I had a great time. Kept me on my toes.
Love it. Love it. All right. Thank you so much.